I'm Abby Meller, Managing Director of Moreover. I'm the host of Leading Lights, the podcast for women in the charity sector. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us on Leading Lights.
Thank you for having me. It's a huge privilege. Thank you.
Before we talk through your journey, I'd like you just to introduce yourself. Tell me who you are and what you do, please.
Of course. So my name is Sarah and I am the Chief Executive of Mind, which is the leading mental health charity across England and Wales.
And we are going to just take one big step back so that I can understand the journey that's led you to Mind. So going right back, what's your earliest significant memory, Sarah?
I have loads of very brilliant early memories, but I guess my favourite of all is being with my family in our lovely, we had a lovely council house in North London, and we had this beautiful big kitchen that looked out onto the gardens of all of the people that lived onto the street. And I remember sitting on the veranda, that's what we used to call it, with my dad, and looking out and loads of people and kids in their gardens and playing. And I remember thinking, I probably was about 4 or 5 actually. And I was just kind of struck by the sense of friendship and love and community and feeling huge pride because all of the families were different. They came from all over the world. North London, hugely diverse place. And I remember looking out and just thinking, wow, this is people, this is love, this is community, this is what I'm part of, and feeling huge pride.
That's beautiful. Yes, I can, you've taken me back to that moment in time. But tell me a bit more about your family. What did your family look like? Got brothers, sisters?
Oh, I have a wonderful, wonderful family. I'm so lucky. So I have a huge family. My dad was Glaswegian, but also half African, South African. So hugely diverse there too. My mum's Irish. So huge family, lots of cousins, aunts and uncles, brought up very closely knit with them. I have 2 brothers who I'm basically in love with. They're my best friends. They are the people that I probably trust the most in the world. My wonderful parents who are, sadly, my dad died 12 years ago, but my mum lives across the road. We're incredibly close too. And they brought me up with a real clear sense of duty, belonging. Love was, top drawer in my house. I mean, of course, we had a lot of struggles too. I mean, when I was born into homelessness and, poverty, and, my parents had to struggle, but they made it right and we lived a really beautiful life together. Lots of challenges. My dad lived with a long-term physical health condition as well as mental health struggles. We come from a family of people who'd immigrated to this country. And so what comes with that is quite a lot of challenge. My grandparents, Irish grandparents, came in the 60s to be faced with huge racism. And so we were born from that kind of sense of social justice. And I look back so fondly on my childhood. And I think about my brothers today, and they do very different things. But one of my brothers works in mental health. My other brother works in the music industry. But without them, I wouldn't be at all complete. And of course, now I'm married with my own children, and I hope to bring their spirit into that.
I think that's what so many of us do when we have a happy childhood. Parenthood becomes, how can I replicate that?
100%. Absolutely.
And of all those people that you've mentioned, and perhaps thinking about others that have touched your life, who has been the biggest influence when you think about the role you're in today?
Without a shadow of a doubt, my parents. So, I mean, I think it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think that I've been very fortunate to have the most extraordinary mentors, sponsors, leading lights that I have followed and admired all my life. Absolutely. But fundamentally, to my core, my values, my belief system, have been set about by my parents. And my dad actually was very senior in British Rail. So British Rail before, all of the nationalisation and all of that kind of stuff. So he was a director for British Rail. And so his leadership was much more kind of masculine, I guess, than mine. And, it was in the 80s. So again, it was very traditional in a way. But he had very clear kind of views about what was important in leadership in terms of how you treat your people, how you have to lead from the front, but also have humility and vulnerability and humor. And so that's always stayed with me. He's, a huge character in my life that even though he's not around anymore, I still hold him dear every single day.
The other thing that I'm beginning to hear through these conversations is when people have an influence like that, even when those people have passed, if they had a really clear vision and values, you can hear that in your day-to-day life long after they've passed. It's still very tangible, isn't it?
Oh, you're so right. Actually, that's really crucial. So after my dad died, that sense of worry about, am I going to retain that feeling, that sense of connection? But that, the depth of our love when he was here, the depth of what he taught me was so profound that it feels so intrinsic now to who I am that it's almost as strong as when he was here. So I totally agree and see that.
Yeah, I have heard that. I've heard that from the other women I'm speaking to, also running charities, who hear those voices. It's I tell you what, it's really reassuring more than anything. It's just lovely to know that those people that have played that role continue to play that role for years and decades to come.
Yes, and my mum too,
Yeah.
Well, exactly. I must talk about my mum because I want to tell you this story. Because my mum, she had me when she was 17, right? So she was a young woman. She was told at school that she, as a result of being pregnant with me, that she would never amount to anything. And, it was all very difficult at first. She now has 3 grown-up kids, one who fundamentally adore her, the ground she walks on. But equally, she created the environment alongside my dad so that we could thrive and succeed. Now that, parenting at that age, in poverty, that's not easy. She was a mum the first time round too, and I just look back now and I think, God, I'm so proud of her. I really am. And when I think today about who I am, and she will go around and she's retired now. She just retired as from being a cook in a old people's home. And when I think back, I think through COVID as an example, and I always get a little bit emotional when I tell this story, but after my dad died, my mum obviously lives on her own now and she lives across the road. But during COVID, she was the cook in this old people's home, 15 minutes walk from where we live. And every day she walked through a silent town where there was nobody around, going into an environment where she was PPE up to her eyeballs, terrified, looking after, the people in a residential home, supporting the staff who were watching their residents die of COVID. She couldn't see us, she was on her own. We could see her from the doorway when she had COVID. I remember standing at the end of her path, throwing in a heart monitor and an oxygen monitor, and thinking, blimey, this woman survived COVID in the most awful circumstances. She never missed a day off work. And I just think that's my stock. That's where I come from. And gosh, I'm proud of her.
Yeah, it's that grit, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
And that comes, from circumstances. My mum's an immigrant as well, so I can really understand where people have set up home in a new place. All of those things, I don't know, in my experience as well, become such a vital part of your story, because when you do need to dig deep and you're looking around at the people around you and what they have done, it becomes so much easier if you have those stories to tell yourself.
Oh, you're so right.
And it's important, isn't it? It's important as a woman. It'd be important as a leader anyway, but it's so important as a woman, I think, to all the different life stages that we go through. As your mum, you have gone through pregnancy. As we get older and we consider like perimenopause, menopause, we're beginning to understand the impact that has on work. All these challenges aside from everything else that goes on, which we'll get to as well.
Oh, don't get me started on the menopause. Dear Lord, we might be here till Sunday.
we should certainly touch on it. This is about female leadership. And, we need to be really direct about the different experiences that we may have. Some of these conversations, there are so many things that are just relevant to anyone that's going to be in a leadership role. But then there are additional things that just impact our lives that we need to understand better as women so that we can still plan for success, still aspire to be leaders. And I'm imagining the people that are going to be listening to this podcast, and they might be junior people at charities who are really ambitious. They might be women who are in that kind of heads of, we work with lots of heads of brands, heads of marketing, who want to go for the top, who want to and can see that it's within the realistic ambitions that they might have. But then there are other challenges that come up, and we need to know that we can navigate those, that it has been done before. It's doable.
For sure. And I think that's so right. And in fact, that was what really motivated my doctorate, which is about women in leadership, and recognizing, yes, there are loads of general experiences that all of us in leadership roles have to hold on to and face in and lean into every day. But for women, there is a particular dynamic. And I think we can sometimes lose sight of that because we make assumptions that because we've got more women in leadership roles in certain sectors than others, that we've achieved progress or we've achieved that sense of equity and we know exactly what women are dealing with. That isn't the case. In reality, we are still deeply enmeshed, I think, in a sense of not really being able to share the truth of it sometimes because it creates a fear of weakness, or it, makes people feel like these jobs aren't possible. So I think that, we need to be able to create a conversation of truth, but also one of hope, as you rightly point out.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the point. That's my intention, that as we talk, we just create hope, or we understand challenges, so that we can understand how to not work around them, but navigate them. But that still makes it sound negative, and I don't mean, they're just part of life. They're just part of life, as is motherhood.
Well, they are. And look, I think that, the other thing is that we can't get rid of all of this stuff, right? So it is something about, is there an issue or a question about resilience? Is there a question about identity, authenticity, vulnerability, being able to talk about all of these things? And I think I'm certainly of the belief system that talking about the truth of it enhances your ability to lean in and deal. Otherwise, you're kind of in a world of delusion and untruths, which doesn't help anyone.
I completely agree. So you were telling me about your family life and your influences, and then we were talking about resilience and grit. Now tell me what led you. What was that first moment that you got in contact with mind? Tell me those moments and milestones that led you to mind.
Well, this is really interesting, and a story I have told, and people who will listen to me think, "Oh my God, she's going on about it again." But it is important, and basically, I grew up in this marvelous family, but we also experienced, there was mental health problems in the family, addiction issues of all sorts of, struggles. Right, so I came from a place of understanding and knowing, and being completely comfortable in a space where those feelings and experience existed, partly because, I also came from a loving family that mitigated much of the harm that can come from those experiences too. But growing up, my mum, was a home help for years. So this idea of serving the community was front and center in my family dynamic. And my dad was a community leader. In fact, he, alongside Jeremy Corbyn, set up a housing cooperative, one of the first housing cooperatives in England, which is the house that I grew up in. So grew up with this massive sort of sense of community, right? So I always felt that I probably would end up in a job in that space. But when I was doing my A-levels, I also fancied a bit of archaeology. So I thought if I don't do this, then I might be an archaeologist. And some days, if I'm completely honest, I do think, oh gosh, I'd love to be doing some digging in the earth right now. But anyway, that's an aside. I started volunteering in projects for people with learning disabilities when I was about 14. So through my school, and did quite a lot of that. When I was 15, I got a Saturday job in a what we called a reprovision home at the time, which was for men who'd been in long stay hospitals. And I was basically the entertainment's coordinator, and I would go in on a Saturday and, maybe play bingo with the residents, or we'd go to McDonald's or something like that. It wouldn't happen now because, I was 15, right? But I was quite grown up 15. Anyway, I did my A-levels and I took a year out before I did my degree. And in that year, so when I was 18, I joined an agency to get me a job, and I wanted to work in care, health and care. And I had a specific interest in mental health because of my background. I had already decided I was going to be doing a social work degree. So I remember the day I was in Glasgow with my cousins. I can't remember what we were celebrating, but in fact, it might be my birthday actually, because I remember phoning, the agency sent me a message and said, can you give us a ring? We've got a job for you to start on Monday. Now, I was in Glasgow, but had no plans to come back to London for Monday. But I phoned them up and they said, we've got this job for a housing worker at Mind in Haringey. And I was like, wow, okay, that sounds a bit good. And it just was like 5 minutes from where I lived in Finsbury Park at the time. I thought, right, that's maybe the job for me. So I did go back from Glasgow to London, and I started at this job on the Monday morning, and immediately walking through the door, and this is as dramatic as it sounds because that's how it felt. I felt like I was coming home. I walked through the door at Mind in Haringey and thought, these are my people. This can be done. This is how we can work with people who are vulnerable. This is what it looks and feels like. And it was like a revelation of epic proportions. So I worked there for a long time. I was only meant to be there for 2 weeks, but they extended my contract, and I ended up working there for quite a long time. About 6 months in, my manager at the time and I were having a conversation on the stairs of Mind in Haringey, and there were all these wonky stairs, wooden stairs that basically you were taking your life into your hands by just, walking up them. But, great place. We were standing on the stairs and she was talking to me about the way Mind operated. And Mind is a federation. So you have Mind National, which is the organisation I'm chief executive of, and then loads of local minds and charity shops. But the local minds are independent and they're affiliated to Mind National, right? So it's like a franchise, but not a franchise. It's quite a complicated setup. But and I remember she was describing this and therefore said there's a Mind Central. And I was like, one day I want to be the boss of Mind Central. And I was 18 when I said that and formulated that idea in my mind. And I was 48 when I was appointed as the chief executive of Mind.
Can I just understand, Sarah, when you took that job on at 18, was that a full-time job or a part-time job? Did you go on to higher education?
So it's full-time. I'd come out of education, so I'd done my A-levels. I was in my gap year and I was like, right, I'm going to do this job for a year. And I wanted to get experience because I was going on to this social work degree course. I'd got lots of volunteering experience and then I had my Saturday job, but I wanted something much more substantial, and that's what happened.
And what do you think about that as a blueprint in terms of getting the experience early, the working experience early, rather than going straight into education?
I mean, it's fundamental to my own experience. When I reflect back, one of my strengths and why I was able to take up leadership roles quite quickly, the work experience thing for me was really critical because it allowed me, when I walked into my degree course, it allowed me in very real terms apply the learning and also challenge the academic approach to what was going on in the real world. So, we would be taught something, the theory, and I would be able to say, that's not quite how it works out there.
Yeah.
And really kind of expand my thinking so that when I went back out to work after doing my degree, and actually I worked the whole time doing my degree as well, I was in a much stronger position to bring theory and practice together. And theory and practice together has been my steadfast approach since then. So I am very much instinctive as a person, and I respond in a human way first. But I have learned, and I learned very early on at those moments, that theory is incredibly important. And actually, you can't do these jobs flying by the seat of your pants.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Sarah, what were the other key milestones that led you to this specific role? So you very early on got to know the charity, knew it was the place that you wanted to be, then studied, and then what happened in between? What were the things that were integral to you then taking on this role?
So I think I've been really fortunate to have some extraordinary roles. So I very early on, after I did my degree, I got a job managing and in fact starting from scratch a therapeutic community for women with personality disorder who couldn't be placed in any other accommodation in the country. So it was really cutting edge, pioneering, really difficult. I was 23 years old,
Wow.
and this was really big job, right? Managing a therapeutic community for women in great deal of distress. But it taught me, it was a bedrock moment of learning around working with people, managing people, what people needed for leadership. And I remember at the time I had a great director called O'Neill Thomas. He said something to me that I've never forgotten. And he said, Sarah, do you know what? You are inspirational. And, I know because of your passion and your belief in terms of, getting people what they need, that people will follow you over a cliff. There's no two ways about it. People will follow you. He said, but because of the way you are sometimes with that vision, you'll forget to give them the parachute. Wow. And I was like, oh my God. And so that was a moment about my leadership and saying, it's all right being the visionary and the one that's got all of the fancy words and the exciting ideas. But to be a leader, you have to be able to realize what it takes to get there and make that happen too. And that was a huge turning point for me. And so from then, I got my master's in understanding how organizations work with the Tastock. I went on to manage mental health services in Holloway Prison, which again taught me something else about leadership, which is, was very difficult when you work in those environments, and the role of negotiation and trying to work on, thinking about providing services to really vulnerable women in a prison environment where they're there because they're being punished. All of those things took me again to another level of understanding what it takes to lead in really complex environments. And then I moved out of London with my husband, who I've been with for 30 years, who I must also mention at some point, because I love him. And it's only because of him that I'm able to do this job. We moved out of London, followed my family. I became the chief executive of a local mind. So one day I was looking through the paper. I was really hacked off because I was tired and exhausted from working in the prison. And I found this job for the chief executive of Hunt's Mind, it was called. And I was like, that's my job. I am going to get that job. End of story. So, and I was that clear. It was a ruthless determination. And I basically led that organization for 30 years, and I merged it with loads of other organizations. So when I started, we had about 4 employees. And then when I left, we had, more than 200. And we were delivering services of all kinds to all people. And then I had, I think, my breakthrough job. And this is my moment where, and to be fair, it's not entirely true, because previous to that, I'd done some national work, because the work I'd done in Holloway Prison was developing a service that hadn't been done before. And as a result of the work that I had done with colleagues in government, it was rolled out across the prison estate. So I had some national recognition already. But then I went into a much more regional role, came back out again to be chief executive of the Centre for Mental Health, which is globally renowned mental health think tank. And that job, I think, really broke the mold in terms of the limits of what I could possibly do. Take that national leadership approach, develop my brand as a leader. Who am I? It's not just that I'm a mental health leader, but what do I bring to leadership generally? And I loved that job. I will never forget working for the centre, just in terms of what it's given me. I was friends with the chief executive of mine previously, and we always joked. I remember being at a conference and said in front of 150 people, he's got to leave at some point. Otherwise, I'm going to push him downstairs. This is very serious. And then we worked really closely together while I was at the centre, because, we were leading the mental health agenda together. And then when he told me that he was leaving Mind, I was kind of like, okay, it's now or never. And I tell you, it was probably the most anxious 3 months of my entire life going through that process.
Was it a very thorough process?
It was a hugely thorough process and challenging because everybody knew that I wanted it. So everybody in mental health knew that I wanted this job. Everybody in mental health assumed also that I would get it.
Mm.
So there was a lot of, pressure, and I was incredibly vulnerable. And so, yes, the process was hard, lots of interviews with the board, etc. And I know that I was up against some pretty hefty candidates that had experience that I didn't have. So it was tough. It was really scary.
I was going to ask that as you were talking about the different steps. At any point, were you intimidated by any of these roles? Because on the one side, you've described a really clear vision from like your teenage years of the job you wanted. And it sounds like you've been really focused and you come across as really confident. But was there any point where you just felt scared, intimidated? And you said vulnerable just then.
All the time. Yeah, I'm still scared. I'm still scared of these roles and these jobs. And if you stop being scared, I think then you're in a dangerous place. You have to treat these jobs with kid gloves. You have to know what you're getting into and not underestimate the challenge, and never think that you are all things to all aspects of the job. I mean, that's incredibly arrogant, I think, to hold that view. And so every job I've been scared and overwhelmed and thought, oh my God, why am I doing this? Why am I not an archaeologist? What's that about? That fear doesn't go away. But what mitigates it is my strong vision and belief and commitment to the cause. So really, the only thing I care about, and I sometimes this shocks people that I'm this explicit. The only real thing I care about is the nation's mental health and how we, as a whole sector, not just Mind, how we do the best for people who are struggling every day and who are disadvantaged because of stigma. That bottom line is what my life purpose is all about, because I have seen and I have experienced myself the wrong end of that stick, and it's awful. And I think I was born to do this.
What a huge responsibility, though.
Yes, huge.
Today, in 2024, post-pandemic, with all the other pressures that people are feeling, what a huge responsibility.
It is a huge responsibility. And again, there is a little bit of arrogance, isn't there, in that too, really, that sense of, I'm important to this. I mean, but I think people are important. Individuals are important. But at the same time, I think that one of the things that I'm really clear about, the only reason I can tolerate much of this is because I'm in solidarity with my colleagues who are doing similar things. And so I have a squad of CEOs around me that I can, at any moment, day or night, honestly, probably in the middle of the night even, I haven't tested that yet, but I know I could if I needed to, pick up the phone and say, I need somebody to talk to. I'm in trouble, or I'm struggling. And it's that recognition that I'm not the only one is important.
That's, again, really reassuring to know that you have that around you. Must make such a difference. Tell me, Sarah, what kind of a leader you wanted to be and what kind of leader you are today.
The leader I wanted to be is the leader I'm still trying to be, right? So it's a vision of leadership. So I stand by a model of leadership that's basically feminist leadership. And feminist leadership for me is about inclusivity. It's about justice, equity. It's about being able to lead from the front, but also not take up all of the space. It's about working in community with others. It's about holding true integrity and authenticity. It's about taking risks, but also, and this is the bit that I'm probably not good at, is taking time. So I have a huge issue. I'm impatient. I'm impatient for change. I'm impatient for impact. And I think that, whilst I want to be that leader that inspires everybody, that motivates and looks after everybody, I think the reality is that I do that sometimes really well and other times not so much. But I'm striving every day to be this feminist leader that has integrity and is authentic and is doing the right thing.
And Sarah, there's something you said which I found really interesting. Tell me what you meant by, I'm not in the mould of what people might think of a charity chief exec.
Yeah, I mean, and I still feel this actually. So a couple of things. When I first became a chief exec, and I tell people this, and they struggle with it really, but I remember standing up at a conference once and saying, if you are a fat, tattooed, pierced North London chief exec walking the corridors of Parliament, believe me, it's not easy. So when I first started being a chief exec, I was a really, really big woman. So I was like 24 stone, right? Tattooed. I remember when I was in the Holloway prison, I was a governor grade managing services, but not technically a governor. And the governor used to say to me all the time, Sarah, why don't you wear a suit? And I used to always say, these hips were not made for suits, right? And so I would challenge the mold and go in tie-dye tops and leggings, which, really pushed the boat out. I'm pierced. I speak like Kat Slater from EastEnders, which I'm deeply proud of, by the way. And I don't really operate in traditional models of leadership in terms of the way I speak, the way I see the world, and the way I undertake my role. I don't see myself as a kind of leader up there. My best days are when I'm not talking to kind of, people about leadership, but I'm talking about, what everybody's up to, etc. So, I feel like that is not in the mold of traditional leadership. And when I first came into the charity sector, there was a lot of, and there still is, Oxbridge, Cambridge, and in national charities primarily led by men. I think that is changing. But also, I do think that, the way I look, the way I speak, the way I carry myself, those things have sometimes not worked to my advantage. I think now they are probably things that people admire, but they haven't always been. And funnily enough, I talking about the piercing thing, my daughter goes to a very strict academy school, and she's got her nose pierced, and she's 14. And we were called in because, she's got to take her piercing out at school. And I'm like, no, she's not. Talking to me and my husband about it, and, the idea that piercings, for instance, mean that you're taken less seriously. And to a degree, that might be true, and certainly has been probably for my time, except on one occasion, which I'll come to. But I went into the school and the teacher saying, because it's about perception and etc. And she was sort of a bit kind of reluctant to say this, because she then had to look at me with 20 plus piercings in my ears, both nostrils pierced, tattoos all over my arms. And I'm the chief executive of Mind. So please don't tell me that piercings is the thing that's going to mean my daughter is not going to be successful in life.
Because I've had this conversation with people before, and we we talk a lot because we make films. So we talk about ensuring you see yourself in, like, for us, in films or in whatever it is, but ensuring you see yourself in that thing. And people have said, oh, that's not as important as you think. But I disagree. And I think my story was that my best friend from university, she's from Rotherham, big curly hair, big character, but perhaps not as confident as you think. It's more the stereotypes that you might associate with the way she looks. Worked at PwC. And she used to say, I'm going to have to straighten this hair. I can't do anything about the way I speak. It's the hair, I've got to straighten. But it was these underlying small things that are really hard to convince somebody, but you just know if you know, if they are impacting people's perception of you and therefore where you're going in your career. That was 20 odd years ago I'm talking about. But until you see it and you prove it, that it's nothing to do with the aesthetic or anything. It's what I know, how I feel, the values I hold, the experience I can bring, the expertise. Until we can convince people of that, there might still be a bit of a fight on our hands. I was going to ask you a couple of things, but one of which was, do you see that change? What can we do to create a more diverse board of chief execs in the charity sector?
I mean, look, I would say we've had progress, but not for everybody. So as a working class woman with mixed heritage, I know the kind of real life struggles and the things that I've had to push through to kind of get to where I am. I used to mask my accent a lot, for instance, which didn't work, frankly, because it's far too strong. But it sounded like a North Londoner trying to put on a posh accent. So I realise that now. But anyway, I look out now and I think that there are a number of issues in relation to the diversity of chief executives, which is we're still very male orientated. We are still very white led. And certainly as a sector, we're white-led. Black women are not represented well enough in the sector in terms of leadership. We've got some fantastic Black leaders. I think of Tessie Ojo. I think of Ndidi from UK Youth. And they are absolutely kind of pioneering, but they're having to carry that. They're having to carry that themselves. And they're having to break the mold, right? They're having to kind of bash down the doors. And there is a great pain and there are consequences to that. There are consequences to being the first. And I think that for many of us who've been the first, that sort of scarring is tough to live with, especially when you look out and you think, God, change is so slow. So what could we do? And I think, I look at Akivo, for instance, who are really drumming this home. We've got to have more diversity. We've got to push this. It's about boards of charities, for instance, taking it seriously and saying, we don't want more of the same. What does different look like? And different physically looks different, as well as, oh, actually, let's just get a woman in. No. What do we really mean by different and not more of the same? And confront the truth of it. And we're doing much more of that now. Am I satisfied with the progress we've made? Absolutely not.
Still a way to go.
Yeah.
Sarah, thinking about your role, you've been in it for nearly 2 years, is that right?
Yes, that's right, yes.
Is it what you expected and are you happy?
So it is more than what I expected and I am happy. That doesn't mean to say it's easy and enjoyable every day. It's a deeply challenging, deeply serious, deeply important role. And I think that it's only when you actually do a job of this kind that you truly understand what it takes. I fantasized about it for so long, but it's much harder than I ever anticipated. And so in terms of my leadership stretch and my challenge, it brings about all of that and more. But the rewards are greater, deeper, more powerful. And, my ambition for the organization is bigger than ever. I love it more than ever. And I think to myself, what would I have done if I didn't get the job? And I think that brings such sorrow to me. And therefore, being in the job brings me huge pride, joy, love, gratitude, but I'm not saying it's easy. And there are days when I think, wow.
So given that, how do you manage day-to-day life? How do you cope? What are your go-tos?
So firstly, I have a extremely wonderful home life with my husband and my children and my lots of animals. So I have my husband who I've been with for 30 years, who that means he's seen all of my struggles and all of my successes and has been right there with me. It was a beautiful thing recently. I was awarded an honorary doctorate from Hull University recently, which I accepted basically on my husband's behalf, because I got mine. But I thought, you know what? Actually, he owns this as much as I do, because without him, I wouldn't be able to do this job. I think it's really hard for mothers to be leaders of big organizations without that mainstay at the homestead. My husband knows when the PE kit needs to be washed. He knows when the kids need to be taken somewhere. And that sense of safety, I can't put a price on that. Prior to my husband doing kind of much more of the parent number one role, my mum and dad stepped in. So, I've been very lucky to have that support. And I've got two pretty extraordinary children who are 14 and 11, who honestly, I've been away this week for 3 days. It's been really tough. And most weeks I'm away for 3 days, at evening gigs, etc. And I miss them terribly. But when I come home, the joy of hearing their voices and their chatter about the day, I mean, nobody makes me laugh more than my own children. I look at them and think, God, how are you so funny? I feel like I need to start recording our conversations because they're so hilarious. Um, and that is what it is. My children, my husband, my family, my friends, my pets, those are the things. And I have, I don't know, I haven't mentioned this so far, but I also have ADHD, right? Which means that I do need a downtime. I need to close down. So I'm able to shut down, and my family have to accommodate that too, because I give so much to my work. I have to have space to recover. They give me that space to recover. And it's that really, it's the joy of them and being able to come home and know that my cat has weed on the mat again. Bloody hell.
But I love this because I've had a few conversations where I've asked this question, and people who are lucky enough to have a family and children, as you've just described, often mention this, which is contrary to what people might expect. That you're able to have a family. As you say, it's not necessarily easy, but how it's offset with how it is your coping strategy and the thing that makes you happy and the thing that enables you to do the job might be exactly the opposite to what some people might think. But you're describing a world in which, not that we have it all, because again, it's a term I'm really uncomfortable with, but where you can create your own balance around family life and a leadership role.
Yes, you can do it, but I do think it demands those systems in place for you. So, for instance, I know for sure that I could not do this job if my husband hadn't agreed to change his career to accommodate the largest portion of the parenting. So that negotiation was fundamental. Without that, I don't know that I could do. So I look at my friends who are single mothers in leadership roles, and I think they have to create a logistical system around them of such strength and capacity and resource that in itself is a skill that you can't price. And frankly, if you've got a load of single mothers in government right now, I think we conquer quite a lot of the challenges that we have, because no one knows how to juggle complexity than a woman who is doing it on her own.
Absolutely. Yeah, well said. Well said. And now thinking back to the audience and the tips that we might be giving them. So my closing question will be around what's one piece of advice. But looking back, what skill do you think you had that has been most integral to the role that you've got today?
So the first thing that popped into my head, right, is probably, again, not the thing that people might expect, but humour.
Okay. Tell me about that.
I only tolerate environments where humour is part of the way we exist. Right? And that's because I was brought up with that kind of system in place, that we find funnies in bleak times. I think, when my father was dying, or, all sorts of other times, and that being a coping mechanism. So having, that levity, having the ability to, create some relationship with people that is on those sort of humor, that sort of sense of, it's connection. It's a form of connection. So I prize that, and I still hold that strong. I mean, I don't think I'm the funniest person on the planet, but I think I'm quite funny sometimes. And I think, I bring that into spaces that can alleviate difficult moments sometimes. So there's that. But the thing that I suppose I do prize the most is my ability to connect with other leaders. I believe that we must do this work, especially in health and care. We have to do this work in a community of leadership. If you think you can do it on your own, I'm here to tell you, you absolutely can't. That you have to find a sense of solidarity, people that around you that are going to say, Sarah, that was a bit off, or wow, come on, go for it today, and you can message someone and say, I feel really rubbish today. I need my squad to give me a bit of a boost. And immediately, they roll in and do that. That for me is number one. Get your chief exec squad around you, get your peer leadership around you, and hold them tight.
I think that's true at every level.
Every level.
That you need that squad around you, as you described it. No one's going to understand the challenges that you're facing as your peers. And also, there's a lot to be said for looking outside your own charity, because we're in a unique position that we work with tens of charities at any one time, and you see the challenges on repeat.
Indeed.
Across the board. So sometimes, we think, gosh, if you could just speak to one another. Actually, as an aside, we do a quarterly get together for that very reason, for heads of brands and marketing, because it was just the realization that this head of brand at this charity is experiencing the same challenge as this, or has just been through the same challenge. So by connecting them and giving them the opportunity to speak as peers, forget the, we're all fighting over the same pound type thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Cast that aside.
Yeah, put that to the side, because it's really a bigger problem than that. When you get people talking and connecting, you're right, you kind of build this network, this support group that transcends all of that and only benefits each of these individual charities, which is what we all want, ultimately.
Absolutely right.
So really understand that point that you're saying. Thinking about the charity sector, Sarah, how are you feeling? It's been a funny year, 2024, and we're about to go into 2025. How are you feeling? Optimistic or hopeful, or do you have concerns for the sector?
I think I'm feeling a bit of both of those on different fronts. So on one hand, I feel positive because this government, I think, have set about a civil society covenant and want to work differently with the sector. I think fundamentally, though, there are still some deep, profound issues around the way we are considered, how we're funded, the precariousness of that. The things that we're facing into in 2025 are huge. Rising demand, less money, policy stuff that's kind of really difficult to grab hold of, global destabilization. I mean, the lists are endless. And I think, I've really reflected on this, I think this is the hardest time for charity leaders that I've ever seen. And that's certainly what my colleagues are telling me. Quite a lot of people are leaving roles in the sector because of these challenges. And so I think that we've got to be braced. We've got to be braced for some rather choppy headwinds. And so I'm going to be holding hands with my sisters and brothers in leadership roles as we go into, we're fighting for the people we care about, and we have to hold on to that.
And that's why it's so important that we keep encouraging this next generation of leaders, and that they come from all walks of life with all experiences. Thinking about that next generation, because I know we've got to wrap up our session, although I'd love to talk for hours and hours, because I know I could with you, Sarah. It's been so interesting. What one piece of advice would you give? Can you boil it down to one thing that you would say to somebody who has an ambition to be the chief executive of the charity they're working at today?
I think that's a great question, and one that is hard to answer because there's so many things I could say. But I guess that there is something, I said it earlier on, about this sort of notion of theory and practice. I do think that you have to invest time in your own learning and development. Don't ever think you know it all or that learning moment stops. There is never a tipping point for learning. I still every day read a new book or talk to another person or another expert and think, oh my gosh, I'm going to build that in. And so I think that focusing deeply on that is you're investing not only in your own leadership potential, but the benefits to the organization are huge. So hold on to learning and don't ever think that that stops. And there is a moment when you think, oh, I've got it now. I'm done and dusted. I know how to do it.
Sarah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. That was wonderful.